Right, I'd like to call to order this meeting of the City of Lake Forest Park City Council. This is Thursday, May 22nd, 2025, 7 p.m. I'm Tracy Furtani, the Deputy Mayor. Tom French, the Mayor, is ill, so he asked me to step in. Okay, so I'll lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, everyone. Please be seated. Okay. So I have the next items being the adoption of the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
All right, I was going to say that Councilmember Lebo, did you want to make a change?
Yeah, this is a request. So on item E of the consent agenda, resolution authorizing the mayor to sign a contract with Canon U.S.A. This was brought before the Budget Finance Committee, but I don't know that the whole council saw that. So I would just ask the pleasure of the council as to which they would like a presentation or have any questions.
Sounds appropriate. So thank you for bringing this to attention. Does the maker of the motion want to amend the motion? It seems to be a friendly amendment.
Yes.
And the seconder, do they want to second that amended motion?
Sure.
Okay. We're very informal here. Okay, so, all right. All right, all those in favor of adopting the amended agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
And I think, Councilmember Saunders, yes. I couldn't hear you. Yeah, thank you. All right, so it's passes unanimously. Thank you very much. All right, now we'll move to public comments, and I'll read our standard statement. The council will not be accepting online public comments. This portion of the agenda is set aside for the public to address the council on agenda items or any other topic the council might have purview or control over. However, the mayor or council may not respond to comments from the public. If the comments are of a nature that the council does not have influence or control over, then the mayor or presiding officer may request the speaker to suspend their comments. The council may direct staff to follow up on items brought up by the public. Comments are limited to a 3-minute time limit. Thank you, Chief. All right, there is no one signed up on the sheet for public comment. Is there anybody in the audience who would like to make public comment? All right, seeing none, I'm going to close public comment. Moving on, then, we have a couple of proclamations. I've asked Councilmember Good to read the National Gun Violence Awareness Day one.
National Gun Violence Awareness Day. Whereas every day more than 120 Americans are killed by gun violence and more than 200 are shot and wounded, with an average of more than 17,000 gun homicides every year. And whereas Americans are 26 times more likely to die by gun homicide than people in other high-income countries. And whereas Washington State averages 853 gun deaths every year, with a rate of 12.4 deaths per 100,000 people, a crisis that costs the state $11.9 billion each year, of which $171.7 million is paid by taxpayers. Washington State has the 40th highest rate of gun deaths in the U.S., and whereas cities across the nation, including Lake Forest Park, are working to end senseless violence with evidence-based solutions, and whereas support for the Second Amendment rights of law-abiding citizens goes hand in hand with keeping guns away from people with dangerous histories, and whereas in January 2013, Hadia Pendleton was tragically shot and killed at age 15, and on the first Friday in June, people in the United States will recognize National Gun Violence Awareness Day and wear orange in a tribute to her and other victims of gun violence and the loved ones of those victims. And whereas a group of Hadia's friends asked their classmates to commemorate her life by wearing orange, they chose this color because hunters wear orange to announce themselves to other hunters when out in the woods. And orange is the color that symbolizes the value of human life. And whereas anyone can join Hadia's friends in this campaign by pledging to wear orange on the first day of June each year to help raise awareness about gun violence and honor the lives of victims and survivors. And whereas we renew our commitment to reduce gun violence and pledge to do all we can to keep firearms out of the hands of people who should not have access to them, and encourage responsible gun ownership to help keep our families and communities safe. Now therefore, the mayor and city council of the city of Lake Forest Park do hereby proclaim June 6th, 2025 as National Gun Violence Awareness Day. Signed this 22nd day of May, 2025, Tracy Furutani.
Thank you very much. All right, and I've asked Councilmember Goldman to recognize June 2025 as Pride Month.
Yep, delighted to. Whereas the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer LGBTQ+ communities of the greater Puget Sound area are an integral part of the vibrant culture and climate of our area. And whereas the diverse LGBTQ+ communities continue to contribute to widespread academic, economic, artistic, and social spheres within and around our city. And whereas the month of June was designated Pride Month to commemorate the Stonewall riots, which occurred in June 1969 and are generally recognized as the catalyst of the LGBTQ+ rights movement. And whereas the LGBTQ+ communities of Puget Sound have thoughtfully organized numerous workshops, sporting events, receptions, festivals, concerts, plays, dances, and a host of other inspired activities to participate in during the celebration of Pride Month. And whereas the city of Lake Forest Park remains committed to protecting the civil rights of LGBTQ+ communities, as the power and purpose of this iconic event proves vital in our unified effort to forge a more open and just society. And whereas the active and involved lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer people and families make an indelible impact upon the quality of life in the Puget Sound, and Pride Month serves as a call to our collective consciousness to persist in the fight to eradicate prejudice and discrimination everywhere. Now, therefore, the mayor and city council of the city of Lake Forest Park proclaim June 2025 to be Pride Month in Lake Forest Park and encourage all citizens to recognize the enduring efforts and ongoing contributions of the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer plus communities to our city and to our country. Signed this 22nd day of May, 2025.
Thank you so much. And I believe you mentioned to me earlier that we are going to be raising the Pride flag at City Hall this coming month.
Yes, I think maybe Clerk McLean could provide details of that.
I believe we'll raise it up on June 1st. I don't have any other details than that.
No. All right, appreciate that very much. Thank you both. Okay, so moving on, we've got presentations. We have the end of the 2025 legislative session report, and is Shelley Helder online? Yes, there you are. Hi, Ms. Helder.
Hello. Okay, I'm just going to pull my presentation up here and I'll get started. Can you hear me okay? I'm getting a head nod from Councilmember Saunders. Can you hear me in council chambers?
It's a
Yes.
little
Yeah.
like you're talking in a box, but we can still hear you.
Okay. Okay. Well, maybe if I project my voice a little bit louder, that will help.
There we go. Thank
Yep,
you.
A little better, thank you.
Okay. Okay. Well, good evening. I am Shelley Helder, and I've had the privilege of representing the city of Lake Forest Park in Olympia this past legislative session. So I'm here this evening to provide a report on the outcomes of that work. So my presentation will have three main components. I'm going to start with a high-level overview of the legislative session. I'll summarize outcomes of the city's legislative priorities, and then I'm going to wrap up by talking about some next steps. So the 2025 session was the first year of the two-year legislative cycle, referred to as the biennium. The first year is always 105 consecutive days. And the first year is longer because the primary purpose is to adopt new budgets, which the legislature did. In addition to adopting the new budgets, they also introduced 2,387 bills and ultimately passed 433. You can see on the screen that the number of bills introduced this session was greater than that in 2019 and in 2023. I eliminated 2021 as a data point because that session was completely virtual. But interestingly, despite having introduced more bills than those previous years, the number of bills that actually passed the legislature is smaller. And I attribute that to the challenging budget environment that the legislature faced this year. Democrats maintained strong majorities in both chambers. It was 59-39 in the House and 30-19 in the Senate. Of the 147 legislators, there were 24 freshman legislators. That was a really high level of turnover. There were also new committee assignments, leadership changes, and evolving policy priorities. 2025 also marked the beginning of Governor Ferguson's first term in office. So the state has three budgets: the operating, capital, and transportation. And this year's budget negotiations were uniquely difficult. We entered the session facing a projected $15 billion shortfall over 4 years. That's one of the largest fiscal challenges in over a decade. The shortfall was driven by slowing revenue growth and rising caseloads. And that the budget reality influenced every discussion and put extra scrutiny on any policy that was being considered. The operating budget is the largest of the three state budgets. It pays for the day-to-day operations of the state agencies, of colleges and universities, and of public schools. The primary sources of funding for the operating budget are state taxes, federal funds, and tuition. The 25-27 operating budget is $77.8 billion and leaves $2.3 billion in reserves. In adopting the budget, the legislature passed bills that generate $4.3 billion in new revenue. The largest contributor of this new revenue is an increase to business and occupation tax for some businesses. The capital budget pays for construction, acquisition, and maintenance of state buildings, public school buildings, higher education facilities, public lands, parks, and other state assets. It is the smallest of the three budgets and is funded primarily through the sale of bonds. The capital budget is $7.5 billion, and it leaves $349 million in bond capacity for a supplemental budget. For comparison, the previous biennial budget was $9 billion. So this budget was significantly smaller. The capital budget is the source of funding for local community projects. And the amount that was allocated to that purpose in the new budget is $201 million, roughly $30 million less than what was allocated in the last budget. And the average size of the award for those local community projects is $604,000. Also a reduction relative to the average size of the previous budget when it was roughly $800,000. So I note that just to highlight that the capital budget did not have the same level of capacity as it has had in past years. And that's primarily due to a lack of new federal funding. The final budget is the transportation budget. And of course, it pays for transportation activities such as designing and maintaining roads and public transit. There was $1 billion shortfall projected for the 25-27 biennium. So the budget writers were faced with the option of cutting expenditures or raising new revenue, or both. And in the end, they opted for both. The 25-27 transportation budget is $15.5 billion. The legislature delayed the timing of projects as a method of limiting expenditures in the near term. And they adopted legislation generating $3.2 billion over the next 6 years. The primary source of new revenue for the transportation budget is a 6-cent gas tax. Of that amount that is increased, 2.5% is dedicated to counties and 2.5% is dedicated to cities. And that amount it is indexed to inflation, so it will go up over time. Right now, the amounts that is distributed to cities from the state gas tax is not connected to inflation. The amount in this upcoming biennium is $36.2 million, or I guess over the next 6 years, the amount that is expected to be distributed to cities is $36.2 million. And that will be distributed on the basis of population. So I'll shift now to talking about the city's legislative priorities and outcomes. The city had 4 priorities for this long session. The first priority was a $1 million request from the capital budget for phase 1 of the Lakefront Park development. To advance this priority, we worked with city staff to develop a fact sheet that outlined the vision, the funding that's been secured to date, and other key details about the project. We used that fact sheet in meetings with legislators and to support the formal application. Also, with the support of city staff, we submitted the formal application, which has to be sponsored by a state legislator to be considered by capital budget writers. When the proposed capital budgets were released, the House version had no funding for Lakefront Park, but the Senate budget included $1 million. So in the final weeks of session, budget writers had to reconcile the differences between those 2 proposals. And we advocated both to our delegation as well as capital budget writers to retain the Senate's level of funding. And we were successful. So the final capital budget includes $1 million for the Lakefront Park. And that's allocated through the local community projects program. You recall just a few moments ago, I mentioned the average award through that program was $604,000. So the city exceeded that average. 2 of the city's priorities were related to State Route 104. The first was a $700,000 request to complete the funding for the SR 104 40th Place Northeast roundabout. And we did not have high hopes that we'd be successful with this request, but we kept it as a priority to take advantage of any potential opportunity. And unfortunately, we were not able to secure funding for this project. I mentioned earlier, there was $1 billion budget shortfall in the transportation budget. So not only were there no new funds allocated, but projects that had previously been awarded funding in the upcoming budget cycle saw their funds pushed far into the future. The city also requested that the state prioritize maintenance and preservation of State Route 104 to include complete streets components so that there's support for multimodal connections. According to WashDOT, the estimated cost for this work is $16 million. So that was the amount that we requested be directed to the agency for this work. Again, it was a challenging budget, and so the state often takes away resources from maintenance and preservation when it is facing budget challenges. So the good news is that the transportation budget did not do that. It retained steady levels of funding for maintenance and preservation of state highways, but it also didn't increase any funding or direct any specific resources to State Route 104. The other good news is that the Complete Streets Grant Program, which is administered by the Transportation Improvement Board, did receive a $10 million bump up in the new budget. So this coming biennium, there will be $24.6 million available in grants to local governments. And so that is a really great source for the city to consider applying to for complete streets improvements, either along State Route 104 or other priority locations throughout the city. And finally, the city requested the legislature change the cap on property tax growth, increase direct distributions to cities, and or provide new revenue tools. The bill that would have lifted the 1% cap on property tax growth had more traction than ever before and made it to the final week of session. It was looking very promising. However, the concept died amidst concerns from the governor, and legislators who were already hesitant about the proposal were not willing to vote for a policy that had almost certain outcome of being vetoed. So the bill passed, but it was amended to remove the increase on the property tax cap. Given the governor's concerns with this policy, I'm skeptical that it has a path forward in the near term. So it's a little bit more dire than I think I've ever reported on this topic. When the state has faced challenging budget times in the past, when they're trying to balance the operating budget, they often look to state shared revenues as a source. The good news again is that this year they didn't do that. They honored the level of revenue sharing with cities, and there was even a very small increase in the municipal criminal justice assistance account. I'd say the perhaps better news is that the legislature did provide cities with a new revenue tool to fund public safety. House Bill 2015 provides a new councilmanic 0.1% sales tax to be used on criminal justice purposes. There was also $100 million included in the budget for grants to local governments to support law enforcement. In addition to the city's top priorities, we also engaged in a few additional policy areas based on the positions listed on the city's legislative agenda. So I'm going to briefly review the outcomes from those areas. Continuing efforts from prior legislative sessions, the legislature dedicated attention to the issue of housing affordability. Throughout the session, Democrat lawmakers concentrated on three key areas: enhancing housing stability for renters, increasing the overall housing supply, and expanding financial subsidies for housing development. And as a result of this emphasis, the legislature passed House Bill 1217, which caps rent increases to no more than 7% per year. To address housing supply, the legislature continued its trend of targeting local governments by approving Senate Bill 5814, which mandates a reduction in parking requirements for new construction projects. And it was limited to only apply to cities with a population over 30,000. So it does not apply to Lake Forest Park. They also passed House Bill 1096 and Senate Bill 5633, which allow lot splitting and unit lot subdivision, respectively, as well as House Bill 1491, which mandates density around light rail and bus rapid transit. The legislature also invested $605 million in the state's housing trust fund to subsidize the construction of affordable housing units across the state. On the topic of fish culverts, the state capital budget invests $32.5 million in the Brian Abbott Fish Barrier Removal Program. This is the primary source of competitive grant funding for local government fish barriers. In addition to this amount, which is specific to local barriers, the transportation budget allocates $1.09 billion to state barriers. And that's in the upcoming biennium. There's an additional $1.12 billion in future biennia. And then finally, on the topic of traffic safety cameras, there was an effort to direct 50% of the revenues that are generated by local traffic safety camera infractions to the State Motor Vehicle Fund. This bill, Senate Bill 5757, had a public hearing in the Senate Transportation Committee, and we opposed the bill along with several other jurisdictions, and we were successful in killing the bill in committee. So now that the legislative session is over, what comes next? First, I encourage the city to consider how you might thank your state legislators. The funding for the Lakefront Park development would not have occurred without their support. So Senator Stanford, Representative Dewar, Representative Kloba, they all three worked together to represent the district in a really collaborative way. So I encourage you, however, whether it's through an official city event or if it's reaching out to them individually and thanking them for not just what they did for the city, but also for the time and energy and just portion of their life that they dedicated to being in Olympia. As you know, being an elected official can sometimes be a thankless job. And so receiving appreciation from a fellow elected goes a really long way. Based on what passed the legislature, there will be some implementation that is required of city staff. And so I just put that on your radar to make you aware that there may be more work on their plates as a result of what passed the legislature. And then more importantly than ever, it is critical that the city obligate any funds that have been awarded by the state. This year, one of the major themes of trying to squeeze the most out of the capital budget and balance the transportation budget is jurisdictions that have been awarded funding for projects in the past and have not spent them saw that money threatened, and many had to demonstrate that they would be spending it in the upcoming biennium in order to keep it secure. And they used significant political capital to retain money they already had. Fortunately, we were not in that position, but I fear that moving forward, if we're not diligent in using the resources the state has allocated, that we could end up there. So that is my encouragement to stay the course on whatever the plan is for funding that the city has received from the state. Over the interim months, we develop an action plan, which just outlines some steps that are important to take in preparation for the 2026 session. I know the 25 session just ended, so I don't want to be thinking about the 26 session, but it is going to be here before we know it. It is a non-election year for the legislature, but there are 9 legislative races that will be on the ballot this fall due to appointments and other vacancies. So with that, I just want to say thank you for your time and attention this evening, as well as your engagement throughout the legislative process. This advocacy work is not possible without you engaging and speaking up, traveling to Olympia, representing the city. So thank you for the time and energy that you have devoted to this partnership.
Thank you, Ms. Helder. So I'm going to open the floor up. Anybody have any questions or comments for Ms. Helder?
So I just want to say that when we went down, Councilmember Goldman and I went down with you to lobby to our representatives. They were really very, I don't want to say negative, but unhopeful about the lakefront property money at that point in time. And I think your point that they really worked very hard after that, and they did get that in there. And I hear you about sending them thanks. So we'll work on something for that, because I do know that they worked very hard because they weren't very hopeful at the beginning of that conversation. I'm really thrilled that we have what we need now for that lakefront park. So somehow we got good news out of all of that. I appreciate your efforts on the back end to make that happen too.
Thank you for your comment. Anyone else? Yeah, and I just want to echo my thanks to you and also to Council Members Riddle and Goldman for advocacy, as well as the city staff and those of us on the council who wrote letters. The fact is that basically it was a team effort, and I think it actually resulted in a surprisingly great bounty. So I think thank you letter is definitely in the cards. So yeah, we really do appreciate you representing us while we can't be there, and we hope to continue working productively in the future with you. So thanks.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think next up, and I just actually want to take a quick comment, which is basically, this is the importance of advocacy, right? For those folks looking at us from home, I think basically being involved in the legislative process really does pay dividends, even if it's a really slow and sometimes fruitless policy. The point is basically you can actually make a difference, and really want to encourage people to get involved. Okay, so we're moving on to public hearings, and I believe Director Hoffman, you're up. This is a sign. We're going to initially do the public hearing on the sign ordinance. So there'll be a staff presentation.
Good evening, Mark Hoffman, Community Development Director for the record, and thank you. This is one of many touches for the sign code, so I won't go through the history. We've done the Planning Commission recommendation. We discussed that recommendation at City Council and then completed the Department of Commerce 60-day review and the Washington State Environmental Review based on that. Subsequent to that, we brought this to Committee of the Whole in April. And I believe 8 to 9 revisions were requested. Those were made just prior to the public hearing notice. So those are in the packet materials now. And I could summarize those for you. One point we're getting at is it's becoming very hard to delineate the sequence from start to finish of what comment and who made it and when. We're running out of colors. And that'll become apparent later on with middle housing. But that said, a public hearing is required by code prior to any action on the ordinance by City Council. And tonight is the noticed public hearing, and we don't have a formal presentation for you.
All right. So are there any questions of the director from the council? Councilmember Lebo.
Thank you. I'm in section, let's see, 1852-080, signs in the public right of way. And subparagraph 9, event signs are political signs that are for, we don't have political signs, but are signs for elections considered event signs?
They are not. The reason being it's separate sections of code. So the new term is temporary sign. We don't have real estate sign. We don't have political sign. I'm not allowed to read the sign. So the signs in the public right of way are written that way. For events, we have a process. I'm not sure where it is codified elsewhere in the Lake Forest Park Municipal Code, but you must have a special event permit. One form that comes with that is a sign review. At that level, I'm allowed to read the date, time, and what it says because it's an event. That's separate from Reed versus Gilbert. So it's not captured in here because it's a separate process.
Thank you. That makes sense to me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay. I just wanted to thank you and the Planning Commission and everybody who put in so much work into getting this drafted. And I know the last few yards to get this over the finish line are the most difficult. So appreciate you hanging in there.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to now open the public public hearing for comments. 3 minutes per speaker. Thank you, Chief. Okay, I have Randy Banneker. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor, members of the council. Randy Banneker, I'm here on behalf of the Seattle King County Realtors to speak to you tonight in support of the sign code draft before you. I want to thank you for your discussion at the Committee of the Whole last month. And also thank staff for making this process very collaborative and positive. The outcome that's reflected in the draft tonight is accommodation, particularly in dimensions, that just enables the code to sync with the industry standard for the signs that you've seen out there for forever. Just common sense and really appreciate it. I mentioned a couple items last month that I'd like to just bullet those for the record tonight, and that's simply that for us, signs reduce the time on the market and speed the transaction, the sales transaction for residential real estate. And we think that just promotes a stable community, that you get that new owner in and they begin to be part of the community a little bit faster. More importantly than that, signs support fair housing. Signs can't discriminate. A real estate sign invites any person to locate in your community or consider locating in your community and purchasing or renting that property if they can afford it. Signs make it impossible for any broker, landlord, owner, or organization to deny that the property is available, and hence makes discrimination substantially impossible. Very important element. Thank you for your work and your time this evening.
Thank you for your comment, Mr. Banneker. Okay, there are no other names on the list. Is there anybody in the audience who would like to make a comment on this particular ordinance? All right, seeing none, I'm going to close public comment. Okay, so staff, is there a response to any of the comments that we heard?
We're good.
Thank you. Staff has no response. We're grateful for the comments and we're glad that a representative of that industry was able to provide feedback. It's a challenge, code enforcement challenge, not being able to read a formally known as political sign or realty sign. It will be a challenge in the future. But for the category of the sign that was commented on, I believe we've found a good balance and then have had to slightly amend the other types that are allowed through permitting without significantly expanding the size, number, and so forth, with one exception, which is the number of temporary signs in the public right of way, which was deleted. So we're grateful for the comments. I'm most grateful for the words between lanes of travel. It took me 2 or 3 days to figure out how we were going to draft this. And apologize for calling 104 and 522 a roundabout. It's portions of an intersection, but the between lanes of travel language really works with the infrastructure, sidewalk, curb, gutter, and character of the city. So I'm grateful for that, and I think we've captured it.
Great, thank you so much, Director Hoffman. Okay, so I'd entertain, since this is our third touch, and I haven't heard anything to the contrary, a motion to for this adopting this ordinance.
I move to adopt ordinance 25-1308, amending chapter 18.52 of the Lake Forest Park Municipal Code signage to bring the sign code into compliance with recent legal decisions.
Second.
All right, the motion has been made and seconded. Is there any further discussion on the part of the council? I want to check our online presence too. Okay, all right. Oh, sorry.
She good?
Oh, sorry. Okay, Councilmember Saunders, I didn't see you.
Okay,
Oh, I'm here. I'm with you.
Okay, thank you.
I just want to comment how when we first heard about this, oh, there's just a few things that we have to update to align to the sign code. Boy, were we naive. This has been a big effort that we didn't anticipate, and I want to appreciate all that had their hands in it to get it to this point. I know that we still were talking about maybe a tweak here or there, but what we have right now is a pretty solid piece of policy. So I'm happy to support it today.
Thank you. Councilmember Goldman.
Yes, I'm also supportive. I think, this has been a very collaborative process, and I think we've reached a new sign code that balances legal requirements with what we think fits Lake Forest Park with what is going to be feasible for city staff to actually enforce. So I think this is a good improvement on our code.
All right, thank you, Councilmember. Anybody else? And I'll just chime in with thanks to not only Director Hoffman and his department, but also the Planning Commission, because I know they spent a fair amount of time working on this. So thanks to all of you who worked on it. Okay, so I guess basically we'll move the question. So all those in favor of approving ordinance 25-1308, amending chapter 18.52 of the Lake Forest Park Municipal Code signage to bring the sign code into compliance with recent legal decisions, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed or abstaining? All right, for the record, it was a unanimous vote. All right.
How many years that
We can certainly believe it. Thank you so much. Okay, so I think we're going to move on to the consent calendar. As you recall, we've moved E to ordinances and resolutions for action. It's now just A through D, to be clear. So I'd entertain a motion to approve the consent calendar.
Motion to approve consent calendar A through D.
Second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor of adopting the amended consent calendar, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
Aye.
Oh, sorry. All those opposed or abstaining? Okay. Again, let the record show it is a unanimous vote. Okay. All right, so now we are going to go to 9A, which is ordinances and resolution for council discussion. This is resolution 25-2019, authorizing the mayor to sign the professional services agreement with HDR Engineering for the electric vehicle charging planning project. And I believe that's Ms. Phillips. Thank you. Welcome.
Good evening. Thank you, Council, Deputy Mayor, for having me this evening. Gonna wait a moment for my presentation to come up. Thank you, Matt. So tonight I am here to talk with you about a professional services agreement with HDR Engineering for electric vehicle charging planning. Just going to give you a little bit of a recap because this project was sort of headed in one direction, then came another way, and now we're back here. So just to get everyone on the same page, last year the city was awarded 2 grants from Commerce. Each was for $75,000, and that was for installation of EV chargers at City Hall and Public Works operation. We did not have a PSA with a consultant yet for the project, but we had an on-call consultant provide the city with a construction cost estimate for that work, which was $341,000. In 2025, thanks to Rebecca joining us, the city discovered that the work would cost a lot more than that and that there was a lot more consideration that had to be taken. As a result of that, we declined the Commerce funds because they were dependent upon constructing this year, and that wouldn't have been possible with all the work that we had to do. And coming up with whatever shortfall, there was no plan for that in place yet. We were sort of putting the cart before the horse. So meanwhile, we had an RFQ out for the project. That was how we got connected with HDR Engineering, and they did submit a statement of qualifications, which led to discussions with them, and we collaborated with them to talk about a new project scope. And out of that, decided that we should move forward, if possible, with pre-design analysis. So the items on the table for pre-design analysis, this is a much more comprehensive scope than what we had originally considered in 2024. It's also more comprehensive in that it includes both Public Works lot, the City Hall lot, and the Police Department lot, which wasn't considered last year. So for those 3 lots and the buildings, we have to look at the capacity, we have to look at the panels, what they can do. We have to interface with Seattle City Light to find out our existing service. That is a process that typically takes quite a long time. We have to find out the transformer capacity, find out if we need an upgraded transformer. There's also the question of needing a separate meter for the public chargers in the City Hall lot. That needs to be answered. We should do a traffic analysis and we should do a parking lot study. So all of these things really need to be in place. The last thing was that the grants that we turned down were for level 3 chargers. But for the police department, those really probably wouldn't be the right solution. We would probably need rapid chargers for their vehicles since they're in and out so much. So there's just a whole lot more considerations if we want to move forward with this project. We have to do it right. So all of these items are what we talked with HDR about. And this is just a little snippet of their scope on the top there. It's a much bigger scope, but essentially their scope is going to cover all of those items and then some, which is excellent. And their fee is about $195,000. And the current CIP, it still includes that $341,000 that was the initial estimate that was given to us last year. So This is covered with funds in the CIP currently. And because we're like gonna do this project for real, if we move forward, we're trying to really figure everything out. They're also gonna help us work on a more accurate cost analysis and find out where we can get funding. Another thing of note, when we did turn down the commerce funds, we had the discussion of, will we be eligible in years to come? And they said, absolutely. This has no negative effect on that future relationship or future funding source. So that's positive. So that's what's on the table tonight. It's a PSA with HDR to do this analysis to figure out where we're at.
All right, Council, do you have any questions? Go ahead, Councilmember Lebo.
Thank you for the presentation. Could you talk, and I've worked with HDR in the past and they're an excellent engineering firm. Could you talk a little about their experience doing this kind of study?
Oh,
And I
yeah.
have some follow-on questions.
They have a lot of experience, and the statement of qualifications that they provided, it was hundreds of pages long, and they showed many examples of how they've guided municipalities through this work successfully.
It is a little more than I would expect to see for this kind of level of work, and I might suggest you think of it backwards. As you point out, the infrastructure is going to be a big consideration. Do you need transformer meters? Can City Light provide it? So you might think about working backwards in terms of what is actually possible. And City Light does take a long time to do it, just like any large municipality organization. They have a lot of things that they're working on at any one time, so it does take a while. But I might think about looking at it a little backwards, what is actually possible, because our CIP talks about 10 charging stations, and the cost of providing 10 charging stations and the infrastructure that goes with that is going to be quite high. And I'm not sure that regardless of what kind of grants we get at $75,000 a pop would be able to accommodate that. So I would encourage you to look back at just sort of the process to see if you're not going too far and realize you don't or can't afford the infrastructure necessary to do that. The other is, while it's in the CIP, I'm not quite finding the line item in the budget. So are you intending to use unallocated contingency within the capital facilities fund?
So in the original budget, as was stated, we were anticipating receiving the grant funding in addition to doing the project. And so that was budgeted at, I think it was about 210,000. And so we just pivoted and allocated now, or showing to allocate that money for the study once Director Dickinson was hired. So it's just been pivoted, and it shows that in the actual adopted budget.
Okay, maybe I
That's
just
the
need some.
question
Yes, that's my question. Maybe I just need some help.
on the actual page.
Yeah.
So on page 115 of the adopted budget, it shows on the schedule capital improvement projects on that list that it says Public Works, City Hall, EV chargers study, which was a pivot from the original, the proposed budget, because at that time we were not under the anticipation it was going to be a study. We thought that we were going to be receiving the $75,000 in grant funding and completing a project, but since then have been much more educated on the process and what we weren't factoring in. So this pivots to taking in the more holistic approach to make sure that we're doing it accurately with Seattle City Light and accounting for all of the proper infrastructure in order to support the desire.
Yeah, are there any other questions? Councilmember Good. And then Councilmember Riddle.
In reference to Councilmember Lebo's working backwards, I think that means, is there a price that would be too expensive to move forward on? Is that what you meant?
Sometimes when you realize that the infrastructure just can't support your desires, I mean, City Light may say, that level of service is just not appropriate for this area. Because one of the challenges at the Public Works was that it was originally, I believe, a house. And so the infrastructure out at the public service may not be very high.
So. Well, also with that,
Yes, it was
Yes.
originally a house, the operations building.
Yes.
Yes, it was originally a house, so not built to support this sort of installation, and it's the same issues that we're having, even with this building, because it was the panels, et cetera, and our announcement were sized just for the use of these structures and not for the addition of, many kilowatts to support charging stations.
So HDR should be able to help you, just in terms of gross numbers by looking at your transformer and infrastructure and saying, well, you've got a 30 kVA transformer and you really need 125
Yes,
Correct.
and so then you decide, is that really practical?
Yes.
yes.
well, my question is also, is there a price that's too high to pay? In other words, if it costs, how much would that be too much for the cities to be able to move forward with? So I'm just want to level set expectations that you have to have an idea of how much money will be available to do what you want to do and then adjust accordingly.
I believe the plan is to HDR will provide a more accurate cost assessment than what we had, that as a result of talking to SCL, looking at all the panels, doing every single thing I named, and that real estimate will be something that is presented to council along with a possible funding package. And then the decision will be made, go out for this funding source and pursue the project or don't. Did I answer your question?
Well, that's, I think that's pretty expensive for, where you might possibly not end up with anything. So I'm just wondering if they had more of a cursory estimate of what it might cost, just a ballpark. And then if you can afford that, then it would be more appropriate to put them under contract to fine tune that.
Yeah.
But what if they come back and they say it's $10 million? That's what I'm saying, is that if
Yeah.
you have to figure out, is this possible with X amount of money?
Mhm.
That's going to be your limits of your budget, because why encumber the city with 194,000 or 100 and some odd $1,000, and you might not get, it might be too much for you to afford. If that makes sense. Does that make sense?
It does.
Am I talking right?
Yes.
I think, if I may interrupt before you speak, I think we need to know a lot of this information anyways, as we're looking at our generator issues, looking at creating more of a battery backup situation, being able to serve our community during severe weather events. I think this is sort of a crossover piece that while it's looking at EV, it's also evaluating all our existing, which is information that we're going to need to pay for at some point anyways. So I'm not concerned that this is going to end up being, a gross waste of money. We're going to get some real valuable information out of it. We approved a fleet program that's going to have a hybrid vehicle. We need to have the support for that. So I think we've already committed as a council to supporting this fleet. We need to support them then with the infrastructure. So I don't think that the timing may move based off of finances, but I don't think that this is something that we should pass up on. Otherwise, why would we have approved a fleet vehicle that included a hybrid vehicle? We just have to do this. I mean, we've committed.
Yeah, you took the words out of my mouth, supporting the fleet. Exactly. So if we're trying to achieve that, and especially in our climate action plan, to have a fleet that supports that plan, we need to have the infrastructure in place. So I think it comes down to, how many fleet vehicles do we actually want to utilize? What can we do? What can we do with what we have? And what do we need to do? And I'm trying to take a really holistic approach with the Public Works Department, where I'm looking at all of those things. Our generator, we need a new generator, we need an electrical system, we need all of these things, and it all kinds of comes together to support that package. But we would need to allow space in our panels, electrical panels, our parking lot, all the electrical upgrades we need to do, the transformers, looking at lead times for transformers to be installed. Do we need a separate transformer? Can we share a transformer? Do we upgrade a transformer? There's a lot of different factors that come into play here. Additionally, we'd need to restructure our parking lots because we'd need to restripe the parking lots and look at how many stalls, the stall counts that we have. Typically, electric vehicle charging station stalls are wider and more like a ADA stall. And so that would mean we need to reallocate our stalls and look at our stall counts again. So having all of those studies in place will just help us support our overarching goal to kind of restructure our facilities and get in a better position.
And I have another question after.
Okay, yeah, Councilmember Goldman.
Yes, so first off, I want to thank you for being nimble and being able to pivot from the original project to this, and I think that's a good direction. This is my ignorance of electric vehicles. The charging infrastructure that HDR would be investigating, is that universal for any model of electric vehicle?
Yes, we would put the universal models. We would do the rapid chargers likely though for the police department. We would also likely need a beefier type of charger at operations if we were trying to go to a fleet for that type of, the larger vehicles. That would require more power and more infrastructure for that. So this is just really trying to package everything up and also having staff make decisions on how we want to move forward, what's the most important thing for us, and deciding, maybe generator over electric vehicle charging stations. So.
Okay, the reason I asked, I just wanted to make sure that as we're looking to upgrade our fleet vehicles, that would this put any constraints on what make and models of vehicle, public works or police vehicles we could even consider purchasing? But it sounds like it'll be pretty flexible.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Councilmember Saunders? Okay, all right, so let's go for the second go around. Okay, Councilmember Riddle.
So I did have some comments that I can also just like send you to in an email. But as I was looking at the scope of work areas where I thought maybe we could get some additional good work, leverage this, I suppose. Developing a system of vehicle IDs so that we can track vehicles. Something that might have like what department it's in, what the vehicle number is, and then like the year it was purchased, so that it's like really easy for us to like, and as we're seeing these fleet, requests, we can see quickly what vehicle is being transitioned into what other vehicle or surplus. It just seems like this is a really unique opportunity because we're evaluating every single vehicle.
And on point usage.
Yeah, and its use, if that's something that we can do. And then we did see a presentation from Administrator Hill about solid state batteries and that new technology. So I don't know if there's anything that this scope of work would be impacted if we're looking at maybe 3 years out or whatnot, when that new technology is in place. So I just don't know enough about it. So maybe HDR can kind of just give us a synopsis of what we might expect. And then again, capacity backup systems, because if we're looking at some of our police vehicles being electrified or your public works vehicles, when the power goes out, that's when we're going to need those vehicles out and around taking care of our community. So what backup system might they, and I don't think I saw anything specifically about that. Like what size of backup system would we need to support the fleet? So if that's another calculation that would be easy for them to pull up, I think we'd probably benefit from that in the long run.
Yeah, I agree. And that one piece of that is having the footprint to touch down these items. And we're very limited here in some areas. And so if we were looking forward and being proactive in that and with consideration of that, we'd have to identify that now. So yes, correct.
Perfect. And then solar ready. I know we talked about it at Public Works, having the material bin covers be solar capable. So what might that look like as far as supporting our system? So just making sure that the systems can be connected. I know there's a lot of electrical work that has to happen to make those things move into the right bucket, if you will. So thank you.
Thank you.
I think that's it. I'll send those to you. An email.
Perfect.
Okay, any other comments? Go ahead.
Just on, I am supportive of this, but I do have some sort of detailed questions, if we don't mind, if this comes back.
But we don't have to act on this tonight, do we?
No.
Yeah, so yes, yes. And as always, I encourage council members to reach out to staff directly with their questions. Okay. I guess I'll take the last slot here then. So I wanted to first say thank you for bringing this to our attention. And I really appreciate the fact that, I hate to say we learned our lesson, but we applied basically some of the experience we had in the past of basically not anticipating this kind of thing. We're wise enough to turn down those grants, even though they were grants, and basically say, okay, we're going to pivot to this, do the groundwork first, and then apply for the grants. In fact, the place of my work, basically, we discovered that having 40-year-old switches is not a good idea when you're talking about multi-kilovolts worth of power going through there. So, my place of work has been shut down for a week while they replaced it, which has been fairly traumatic for everybody involved. And I really hate to see us in that kind of position. The most exciting words I saw in this were in Task 5, the deliverables, narrative content for use in grant funding applications. Love that. So yeah, the fact that we could slot that into basically, for instance, a Climate Commitment Act funding program, that would be amazing. So I really basically think we're going down the right path on this. Having said that, council members do in fact have questions. So we look forward to basically our second go around on this. So thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
Okay. Just lost my thing. Sorry. Okay, so I think we're on to 10 ordinances and resolutions for action. So we're going to start with, I think, the one that we moved. So that's on the Laserfiche. So Clerk McLean. So for the record, this is Resolution 25-2017, authorizing the mayor to sign a contract with Canon U.S.A. Inc. for the Laserfiche Document Solution.
So this is a contract with Canon for the purchase of the Laserfiche cloud system. Give a little bit of history. This started before COVID or during COVID with the court. They wanted to purchase Laserfiche. They got a quote. It was for $55,000. When I started here, I looked at the quote. It was for 10 users. It didn't work for a citywide system. So I started looking at other options. Got like 3 quotes for other companies. Then looked at, the court was very insistent on moving to Laserfiche. Looked at 3 other vendors for Laserfiche, and Canon gave us the best option for the citywide document management system. This would allow the city to have a central location for all our documents and hopefully create an index and improve efficiencies across the board, especially in the court, and create a document index. While this was going on, try and share this. While we were trying to negotiate the contract, which took a long time. In January, so this was included in the biannual budget at 41,000. In January, Laserfiche came back, and I was trying to get it to a flat fee across 5 years. In January, Laserfiche came back and said they're not doing flat fee 5-year contracts anymore. And so they put an escalator in there, and at the same time, the prices went up. So it is a 5-year contract, but I managed to talk them into a 5% increase year over year. And I realize now that looking at this slide, I think I forgot to put the tax and the stuff that's in the packet. So the first year cost with tax would be a little over 36,000. And year two, with the 5-year increase, it would be a little over 16,000 for a total of roughly 52,800. So there was a difference of 11,000 in there. And if you want to see the full 5-year breakdown, the total 5-year cost would be about $107,000. I'm here for any questions.
All right. All right, do you have any questions? Councilmember Lebo.
Thank you for coming this evening and talking about this. This makes a lot of sense. And when you look at the years 1, 2, and 3, so on, it's from whenever you sign the contract. So let's say it's June or July 1st.
Right.
That would mean that for our biennial purposes, there wouldn't be it would only be 18 months instead of 24. Is that right?
Not necessarily, because we have to pay the first year up front. So we pay for, we pay for June, and then next June we pay for.
Okay. Okay. So you would realize the full cost.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for the clarification.
All right, anyone else?
I
Councilmember Riddle?
I remember when we would have to walk down checks for utilities, and now we're looking at digitizing and indexing. And I'm so happy. I wish it didn't cost a dime, but this is the world we live in.
Yes.
I'm really happy that we're moving to this environment. It's going to streamline, all the operations work. And it's also, when community needs something, it's easier to find as well on your end. And
That's the goal anyway. Hoping to get there quicker than as quick as I possibly can.
so my question is, do you feel that the setup costs are going to be sufficient enough to get everyone trained up? And are they committing a human being to us? Like what is coming with the
Yes,
setup cost?
we will get a project manager and they will provide training. I'll probably be ending up being the administrator for it. So when we get new people on board, I'll try and do all the training myself as much as I can.
Okay, thank you.
And
I think Councilmember Saunders.
oh yeah, okay. Can't see her anymore.
Yeah, I think she left the meeting.
Oh, okay. All right, anyone else have a question? Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to thank you for your presentation and appreciate you basically taking the time to put these slides together. Well, the question I had was, this is not just the courts being trained on this, right? It's the whole city hall down.
Yeah, so and every department in the city can use it. It comes with 100 users.
Wow. Okay, yeah, they're definitely in favor of this one. So yeah, I've seen how crowded our hallways are getting with boxes of papers, and to be able to move away from that is going to be remarkable. Yeah. Okay, thanks. I guess basically I will entertain a move to approve this.
I'll move that we adopt resolution 25-2017, authorizing the mayor to sign a contract with Canon U.S.A. Inc. for the Laserfiche Document Solution.
Second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion on council? Seeing none, we'll move the question. So all those in favor of resolution 25-2017, authorizing the mayor to sign a contract with Canon U.S.A. for the Laserfiche Document Solution, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? All those abstaining. All right. Thank you. It's the record show it's been approved unanimously. Thank you.
With
Clerk McCoy.
5 council members now, just
Right.
for the record,
Yes, there are now 5.
since there was a change.
Okay, and so now we'll move on to the resolution 25-2018, authorizing the mayor to sign a professional services agreement with iWorQ Systems for community development permitting software use and support. Director Hoffman.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor and Council. This is the third touch for a resolution that would allow us to operate under a new contract with iWorQ for permit tracking software, building permit, and to some extent right-of-way permits. It's very much needed, and the purpose and the reasons why were outlined prior in May. This recommendation is for approval, and if acted on tonight, we can call iWorks tomorrow and would preserve 5 weeks of transition, which is critical. The reason I bring it up is one of the attachments is the 60-day letter of termination to Excella, which was April 28th. And I'm available for any new questions. There were no carryover questions from committee of the whole. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Director. Is there anybody on council who has a question? Okay, seeing none, I will entertain a move for approval.
I'll go ahead and move resolution 25-2018, authorizing the mayor to sign a professional services agreement with iWorQ Systems, Inc. for community development permitting software use and support.
Second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Councilmember Lebo.
I do want to applaud Director Hoffman for finding a solution that is right-sized for our community. And that represents value of our taxpayers' money. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Here, here. All right, anybody else have a comment?
Yeah, I'll echo Councilmember Lebo in that this seems like a win-win in that it's cheaper than our current system. It seems to be more user-friendly for city staff. Hopefully it'll be more user-friendly for the public, and so better all around. So thanks.
Thank you.
Wonderful. All right, Councilmember Good.
And I know you'll really be happy.
For many reasons, yes, thank you. It's not just the software itself and what it offers, it's the training, it's the human contact and the lower cost.
That's fair. Anybody else? Okay, well, move the question then. So all those in favor of resolution 25-2018, authorizing the mayor to sign a professional services agreement with iWorQ Systems for community development permitting software use and support, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? All those abstaining? All right, let the record show it's approved unanimously with 5. Okay. All right, so now we have council discussion. Let's see. We have the introduction to the Planning Commission recommendation for middle housing and accessory dwelling units. This is the kickoff of a very large thing that we have to do by the end of June. So thank you, Director Hoffman.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor and Council. Hello again. This is an introduction of a primary effort by the city. A lot of work has gone into housing, starting with 3 years of legislation in Olympia, tracking that. We started with the policy level last year, and now we're working on the other end, which is the development regulations, how it applies to specific applications and properties. Last Tuesday, the Planning Commission held their notice public hearing, made a recommendation and 2 amendments. It's been a challenge coordinating with SCJ, but I wanted to introduce this tonight and tack on to the conversation about meeting dates that you had last Monday. And so I prepared a series of slides that I attempted to not make too wordy. It's a very broad subject, and then I'll be open for questions after and get this started. The first slide is just what I would like to accomplish tonight. And in summary, I would like to touch on the mandated comprehensive plan effort going into last December and what that was. And then touch on the Planning Commission process, their review, the public hearing, and the recommendation. Talk about the Washington State Department requirement for 60-day review, the state environmental review that we perform, and then a slide about review schedule from Monday night to confirm and also to remind. And then my final slide, which is 5 items that I'd really like to start stressing tonight as we go into the materials. And then any questions or discussion that you might have. The first difference between this effort and what we did for the last 2 years is that the Growth Management Act required an 8-year, now 10-year periodic update. That was completed last December. Lots of discussion has gone into housing at various levels. We did not want to limit the discussion to, we're only talking about policy tonight. The discussion was broad. So the conversation about middle housing and accessory dwelling unit development regulations has been going on for a year and a half. The ordinance before you and the Planning Commission recommendation for housing is specific to those development regulations. The housing policies are captured in the housing element adopted last December. So on the next slide, we start to get into the action that we're going to request at the end of this month. From January to May, the Planning Commission has held a series of meetings specific to development regulations, looking at existing regulations, weighing the mandates in the legislation, and working with SCJ towards draft amendments and a recommendation. That occurred last week. At the end of this month, we're going to ask for adoption of an ordinance to codify those. This all started with a $50,000 grant from Washington State Department of Commerce for this very purpose. So we're can't thank them enough. Thank them again this morning, in fact. A little bit about the mandated due date. Along with these legislative mandates came a stick. A little different than a lot of the other legislation you see. The stick that I'm referring to is a model ordinance adopted by Commerce. The legislation that we're attempting to address says that if we don't adopt local regulations by June 30th or July 1st, the model ordinance is then in effect. So there's some sense of urgency. We've had an extensive city website for the better part of a year and a half. Specifically this year, it became more specific to development regulations, but there's quite a bit of reading on there, including the original House bill, Senate bill. So there's, if there's any desire to get into the context or the why and the how or what happened 3 years ago, the hope is that that background is there. And now we're modifying it to include these public hearing documents and draft ordinance. This was work item number 1 for the Planning Commission for their 2025 effort. They're now done. They're moving to number 2, which is climate element. And they've already started to discuss that. Their public hearing is required by code. That is now accomplished on May 13th. That night, they made a recommendation to you with 2 changes. SCJ was not able to pivot from that meeting and create new documents specific to the city council that were that would initiate another round of comments and tracking and colors and highlights, red line, strikeout, underline. I was able to meet with them yesterday. So the materials, this presentation and the materials emailed to you just prior to tonight's meeting are so that you don't have to wait for the council specific materials that are being prepared right now. In yesterday's meeting, we thought we may be able to turn it around and I'd have a chance to get them and review them. The initial email came in today at 3:30, and I didn't want to spin that around in an email handed to you without actually opening it and reading it. So it's on the way, but it's safe to say, and we can go over it tonight, the amendment draft that went to the public hearing on the 13th is the material for the city council and represents the Planning Commission recommendation with 2 exceptions. They modified 2 small subsections about accessory dwelling units in relation to minimum lot size and critical areas. Both those were options, and I can go through those tonight. Next slide. Unlike the comprehensive plan, Commerce, if you remember November, December, we were up against that deadline too, and we got Department of Commerce comments late in the process. We're able to incorporate it in, luckily, before adoption. This time they did not grant expedited review, but gave us their comments 2 weeks early. We were able to incorporate all of them into the Planning Commission public hearing draft. Those are now in the materials that you have. None of them were substantive in the sense of changing the purpose or intent of what we're trying to do locally in Lake Forest Park, but they do represent language mandated by the legislation and has no significant effect on how we implement the code. So Planning Commission integrated those. Those are already in. The next slide is the environmental review, which I'm obligated to bring up. After we had that, an understanding that, or consensus that the draft amendments were going to go forward, we started environmental review. Oh, I'm on the wrong slide. We submitted those to the CEPA Register at Ecology. No comments have come back. On May 8th, the CEPA responsible official, my role, issued a determination of non-significance for the non-project action. The appeal period ends June 2nd, which would be prior to the notice public hearing at City Council. Any comments that we received as a result of that or any appeal, you'll be notified immediately. But as of now, there are none, nor do we anticipate any. The next slide is the schedule that was discussed Monday night at Committee of the Whole. I believe I've captured it correctly. There's a series of special meetings and regular meetings. It ends with the model ordinance effective date of July 1st. In talking with SCJ staff yesterday, after tonight, they are to some level available for all of those dates. My hope is that we hold the public hearing on June 12th, followed by a lot of discussion, a potential action date of June 26th, and I include a carryover date possibility of Monday, June 30th, if needed. We have not analyzed what happens if we do not pass a local ordinance by then. I hope we don't have to. But what is clear is starting Tuesday, July 1st, the Commerce Model Ordinance takes effect. So staff and the Planning Commission wholeheartedly back these amendments and recommend approval. And which brings me to the 5 primary points that we will discuss for the next month. On the next slide, the 5 bullets begin that discussion. Primarily, these 4 House bills and Senate bill are what we're trying to address. The primary one is 1110 for middle housing. 1337 is more specific to accessory dwelling units. If my memory is correct, 2321 is the cleanup bill for 1110. Not only has legislation been passed, but Commerce and the legislation has worked to reconcile and clarify, and it's been a moving target. The target as of this winter and spring is represented in the draft amendments for Tier 3 city. The 5 bullets that I would like to clarify are that the grant deliverables are independent of the city's action. We worded the scope of the grant to include a draft actionable ordinance of amendments. We need to deliver that to Commerce for reimbursement by June 16th, and we're on track to do that as of this week. So if you hear about Commerce grant deadlines, that's independent of your review and action. Critical area and tree regulations from the very beginning at comprehensive plan and policy level, it was really clear the city was interested in looking at housing regulations and options that did not negatively affect critical area regulations nor tree regulations, which are very strong. We were able to achieve that by these amendments and no recommended or suggested amendments to the critical area chapter or the tree code. The language that does overlap or in some way involve trees in critical areas is meant to bolster or clarify. But in summary, we are not negatively affecting the city's current critical area and tree regulations on purpose. The key for my understanding is that over the last 3 years, all the legislation and the grant funding is intended to go away from the use of single-family residential development. These codes do that. And I'm old. I'm trying to hammer low-density residential in my head as much as possible. It's a challenge, but that's where we're going to end up. The more we use that term, the better. The other challenge is what this effort is not. Middle housing is not, let's increase densities and options and housing types so that you could build McMansions on everything at whatever scale you could now formally build a single family home. It is not that. It's the same bulk mass height of former single family home, but with smaller units. So for a tier 3 city, for example, you could build potentially a duplex, but that doesn't mean 2 very large primary dwelling units, each maxed out to their former standard. The standards do not change. It's still the bulk mass height that is in place, but now you can do a duplex. Maybe with this, no, I'll wait to the other item. I'll leave this item. The next one is the minimum mandates. And I was talking with the deputy mayor about this and how to characterize it. The discussion over the last year and a half at Planning Commission was very broad, included affordable housing, incentives, density bonuses, inclusionary, lots of concepts. It became apparent, I believe 2-3 months ago, that we were running out of time and funds. A consensus was discussed and framed that said, let's recommend the minimum mandates required by this legislation, by the deadline, but track all of the other discussion items as options, the benefit being if the city adopts standards or provisions or processes in excess of the minimum, there's an opportunity to capture that added benefit through affordable housing programs. So we didn't want to limit the conversation to minimum mandates, that's it forever. It was, let's start with that framework, put it in place, meet the mandate, and then discuss where to go from there. Some cities have, for their use, all of those tools that incentivize deed restricted housing. So the clarification for the minimum mandates is this is not deed restricted. This is not traditional, what planners call affordable housing. This is market rate, but it's the housing types that are literally missing in the middle that don't get built anymore. The market loves large single family homes. Multifamily is not having a problem. There's a gap between the very limited resources of affordable deed restricted housing and single family. And this is intended to capture that for a city of this size, contiguous to Seattle. The option is duplex and accessory dwelling unit. And you'll see as you dive into these, there's some significant changes to the codes that we have in place. The primary thing that doesn't change is accessory dwelling units were permitted by right now. But things like owner presence, you must live there and you get one and you could rent it out and so forth, but you can't sell it. And it must be, limited in size and so forth. The legislation says that you could have 2 and you could sell them or you can condominiumize them. So you'll see suggested amendments for unit lot subdivision, some language about condominiumization. But it all goes to, we can't use single family home anymore, but the bulk mass height that's already codified is what we're talking about for accessory dwelling units and middle housing. I won't go into tier 1, tier 2. We are not that size of a city. Other cities, Shoreline, Bellevue, Seattle, have to adopt significantly more middle housing types, triplex, quadplex. The Planning Commission investigated cottage housing, but with a density of 2 primary dwelling units, that's a challenge, but that is on their list. So that 4th bullet item attempts to capture what these amendments try and do. It was also brought up by separate email, the other items in the Planning Commission work plan. When the work plan was initially drafted, it included item 3, which was the parking lot, affordable housing options, minimum frontage regulations, and so forth. Those are still on their list. They're not itemized. They are now working on their second primary work plan effort, which is the climate element. And then the latter part of this year, they will gravitate into those discussions specific to affordable housing, there's a consensus to start with that. So we will continue the range of efforts for this. They will generate new amendments in the future, and we will keep you updated for that. So pretty much everything that we discuss on the 9th, the 12th, the 26th relates to these 5 bulleted items. And there is apparently a lot of amendments of our existing code because of those changes, but this captures the purpose why. And no further. This is the minimum mandate. So that's all I have tonight. SCJ will be here with a presentation and new documents. We'll get the new documents in advance when they exist and have been reviewed and not wait for the packet for the night. So we'll keep on working tomorrow through Tuesday and see when we can get those to you. The challenge may be how to represent them with 5 months of comments. It'll be confusing. But my plan is to get you 2 documents, a red line with strikeout underline, and then the actual comments so you can see where, like a heat map, where was the discussion, and then go from there on the 9th. And then we'll notice through the clerk a public hearing for the 12th. So that's all I have for this presentation available. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Director Hoffman. Council, do you have any initial thoughts? Councilmember Riddle.
Yeah, I kind of started digging in just a little bit, and some of the themes that I'm seeing is trying to understand the difference between, the lot, the parent lot, the unit lot, any way that we can kind of clarify that. And I've noticed that in the chapter 17, it uses parent lot and unit lot more. So, and the definition of lot is different in 17 than 18. So for me, I'm just trying to make sure that when I'm looking through this, that I'm thinking of the right thing. When it says that, with the, like you said, with the tree canopy coverage, is that for the lot, the unit lot, both? If it's for the lot, you have 2 unit lots, can one have more coverage and the other one less, but the average of the whole lot is, so those are the sorts of, I just want to know what the intent is. So I've got a lot of little comments that I can just email you as to places where I was not sure which way it was going. Which is just more technical, but it helps me understand what the code is. And I know sometimes maybe having a little graphic, this is the law, this, might help us in the community understand what is.
We do have a memo coming that has
Fantastic.
some exhibits.
Yeah.
I could also convey that this is an experiment.
Mhm.
This is new. Issues will arise, but we're working our way from broad to specific.
Mhm.
This is intended to address the legislation, but adapted to Lake Forest Park, a city like Lake Forest Park. It addresses what we need to address and includes the processes, but it does not intend to change each and every detail. A lot of the review and process will remain absolutely the same. An example that came up in our planning directors meeting is utility meters, or what's come up before in discussion. How do you do CC&Rs or agreements for 2 people? I've never seen a condo agreement, where the trash goes, who pays for the water, for 2 to 3 units, or 1 unit and 2 accessory dwellings. I've not personally seen it, but I have faith that they do exist, they do work out, and we will see one. And we will get through it based on these amendments, but how we implement it will not change any of the related rules. We still have 4 water districts that we will seek input. And so the way that the Commerce representative kind of summarized it for all of us directors is it's pushing a lot of those questions down into the implementation stage, the building permit, even codes, single family versus multifamily. So we know we're on the right track, but many of those questions are not answered in these amendments, but will be answered as we implement our existing permits, and not in a negative way. I don't anticipate that we're going to discover we went in the wrong direction, but I do anticipate that we'll need to clarify procedures. Here's an acronym, SOPs. Partnerships with districts, and education with architects, owners. So it's a challenge, but we're heading towards that more specific point.
Thank you. I will send my more detailed questions to you via some email or whatnot, but I appreciate the sort of boundaries you've given them to us tonight
Thank you.
and what it is.
Actually, I did want to bring this up with the council and with you, Director. How would you like our comments? Do you want one compendium of it, or is it okay if individual council members send you their list of questions? I realize this may result in a flood of emails to you, and I want to kind of avoid that if I can.
No, the biggest variable is the timeline. So I'm really concerned about having a thorough discussion, getting your comments addressed, but having an actionable ordinance in time. So I'm willing to accept any process procedure, get me anything.
Right.
The one difficulty is that we've been working on a variety of things. We hired SCJ specifically for these amendments. If questions dive into why this language, at what point was this made? Why does it say this? Many of those can only be answered by the person that actually fielded it and made the amendment. We could certainly read it, understand it. I could apply it to what we do here or require, but we are going to need SCJ in that process because they played that role all through Planning Commission. So luckily they are available and can capture those comments, field those questions, and make those technical revisions at any point they receive them.
Okay, so it sounds like the process is going to be, we send you individually our comments. You funnel the ones that need to be answered by SCJ to them. They send it back to you, and then you answer all of our comments back then.
That will work. We'll find a way to make that work. And then we're really hoping that the deputy mayor can really facilitate the actual limited meeting time, like was done with the comprehensive plan. It's difficult to break these up into chapters, like, hey, let's do subdivision tonight and just talk about unit lot subdivision. It's kind of all of a group, so we're going to be all over the place. But somewhere in there, we need to make progress.
Sounds good. Does anybody else have any comments? Go ahead, Councilmember Lebo.
Oh, thank you. I think Councilmember Riddle raises a really good point, and I've been to many of the planning commission meetings, and so having those presentations and graphics, if there's an opportunity for SCJ to present and sort of run through those little, call them cartoon graphics about what the lots mean and what your options are, I think would be very helpful for the council.
I think it will. And by example, a prior question was, do they get a second shot? Do they get a third shot? I believe we have that language in there, but we need to kind of prove or show that that's the case. What is a parent lot? Then you get to accessory dwelling units. Then you use unit lot subdivision or condominiumize. Then that new owner comes in and says, hey, I'd like to do middle housing. And so we want to make sure those mechanics are captured. And I think those exhibits and those discussions would do that.
Yeah. So if there's an opportunity to do it at our next meeting, I think that would be very helpful to sort of create a base for the council in terms of understanding of how this actually works with the lots and the housing types.
Thank you.
To be clear then, Councilmember Lebo, do you mean the meeting on the 12th or the earlier?
I was thinking of the earliest opportunity because I think that would help us all become grounded in what we're being asked to do.
Okay.
Meaning, what do the words mean? And pictures mean,
Conditions.
sometimes pictures and understanding what you're trying to do, and then you look at the words and go, oh, I get it, as opposed to try to parse the sentence.
Right.
I believe Zoe, who physically did the amendments, the strikeout underline, will be there on the 9th, as will I.
Okay.
I'll continue to read just like her up until that moment. And we'll hope that we can convey, hopefully using existing documents or memos, what that is, but then discover what additional might be available from SCJ or their other cities that they're doing this for. We're not their only client, so I'm thinking that those tools are there for the 9th.
Yeah, I was just thinking of some of the presentation materials that they showed to the planning commission, not recreate them, but just use some what they already had.
That's my hope. Yes. Thank you.
Those are already publicly available, right?
They are, but they're not readily apparent. It's a lot of materials. The the easiest location is the packet on Muni Code but not everyone knows which planning commission meeting, which
Right.
date, without watching them all. I'd recommend watching them all, but that's because I was there. So, but they are captured there.
Mhm. Okay. Councilmember Goldman.
Thank you for the detailed introduction. You mentioned the parking lot for future planning commission items. I just wanted to list a few other topics that have come up at council meetings or our council retreat, and I just wanted to ask, is that something that's in the planning commission parking lot? So the first would be additional middle housing types such as cottage or cluster housing.
Yes.
Second, neighborhood businesses like neighborhood cafes and the like.
It is. The difference is I'm not sure that passed and was signed. I think it might come back. It is a discussion from the leftover from the comprehensive plan parking lot. It's captured in the policies, but not in development code. It would have been more primary had this session passed one of the House bills, but I don't believe it passed. Short answer is it's on the radar for planning commission.
And then the third is consolidating similar zones such as the 9,600 and the 10,000 residential zones.
And not that I have full control over their agenda, but I believe the discussion for affordable housing options, frontage minimums, and consolidation of residential zoning districts might be the first parking lot item that they want to take up.
Okay, thank you for confirming that.
Great. Thank you. Go ahead, Councilmember Riddle.
I do know that there may be implications like for stacked units in the International Building Code and or the fire code. We don't need to get into detail on that, but it would be maybe useful to see like what that, what the implications are. I think that they need to be sprinkled. If you've got, there's a few things that might change kind of how we might approach stacked versus side by side. So if you have any insight in one of these meetings, if you could bring some insight into how that would actually affect how these buildings are being constructed differently.
I could try, but I know we do not have that. And I go back to the point when we were tracking the various versions of the bill through the legislation and the SBCC and representatives were commenting similar to how can this be done? You have one code for single family. You have another code for middle or multifamily. You need to revise. Somehow they work through it. I don't know the technical language on how that's done, but it was addressed in the legislation. It will be learned by individual building officials, plan reviewers, as they get these projects. Accessory dwelling units are no mystery. Other than now they can be sold, but that's more of a planner problem. But a duplex and what advice are we going to give an owner about which building code applies? That's beyond me. But I have faith that it was addressed because the legislation was passed after those comments were made and addressed. And I believe a lot of the correction or revision or coordination bills speak to that. I have not heard a conclusion or resolution from the SBCC or any building official that it's going to be easy.
Okay, so maybe we tackle that at a little bit of a later date to see how it implicates. I don't want it to stall this process.
Yeah, and
sounds
it is
like
certainly not part of these amendments.
Yeah.
The 2021 ICC suite is in a different chapter. We're not revising, augmenting, affecting those in any way. You will meet whatever fire, electric, plumbing code applies to your project, regardless of what we're doing here. But I think they've massaged the terms and at least made them compatible so that it can be implemented by those that do that. At least that's my hope.
Okay.
All right, are there any other comments? Go ahead, Councilmember Good.
Another silly question, but you'll have definitions.
Well, I shouldn't say most. Many of the amendments are definitions.
Okay.
That definitions chapter, and that's the key because to understand what's changing, the terms are all different. And single family residential for me, I cannot stop saying that.
But could there be possibly one that's alphabetical on a cheat sheet in the beginning?
Oh, yeah, the ordinance and the code that comes out of this is intended to be alphabetical. Definitions are hard. One thing I try and avoid at all costs is having a standard or regulation hidden in a definition, and the definition just defining the term that's used later. So most of the red that you'll see will try to do that. But I would welcome any comments or just simply noting or flagging something like, what is this? It gives us an opportunity to make these definitions better for a homeowner, somebody that doesn't read them every day. Oh, and the other balance, we need to really stick to the language in the legislation. That was very purposeful and hard won by, it was hard won.
Councilmember Goldman?
Yeah, on point, I would just say if you look at the PDF file that Director Hoffman sent us, pages 14 through 27 are the alphabetical list of all the definitions. It's section 18.08 in the code.
Yeah, and it was just sent at 5:48, so that's why some of us haven't seen it. Thank you, Councilmember Goldman. Yeah. Okay, any other comments?
It hasn't been asked, but I wanted to, on behalf of SCJ, we have the materials, but they have not been reviewed. The two primary changes at Planning Commission. So one of my slides cites the code section, but I wanted to verbally go through what they were. They were specific to accessory dwelling units. They are voluntary or options for a city to take. They were drafted in there for that purpose of options. They made it through, I believe, March without being challenged. We found that it may not have been recognized. But going into the public hearing and the motion that was made for the recommendation, they made two changes. If you have an existing lot that is non-conforming for lot area, you don't meet the existing minimum lot area. Subdivided 50 years ago, 100 years ago, under the county, doesn't matter. The option for the city was that you could preclude middle housing and accessory dwelling unit codes from a situation like that. The commission felt we have many of those. And the purpose captured in the policies is to promote middle housing. So the change they made coming out of the public hearing is that if your lot is minimum in lot area, you can still do middle housing and accessory dwelling units. It's not precluded. Similar to that, critical areas. There's an option for a city to have language that says if you have critical areas, you don't have to allow middle housing, duplex, accessory dwelling units. It's pretty clear, but how I read that is that if you have a critical area, a buffer or setback, and it crosses over onto your property, none of this is available to you. That is an option. Planning Commission did not want to do that. What they recommended to you was that you could have critical areas. You will not do accessory dwelling units and duplex and so forth on those areas. Existing code prevails, but whatever may be left over, to whatever extent you could actually build, construct, and meet all the other codes and utilities and driveways and so forth, you can do it. So they wanted to be very clear on that. I don't think at any point it was the council's intent or the communities or staff to be that stringent for substandard lots or critical areas, but it was an option. And it's clarified that it would no longer affect. One thing we kept, if you're not connected to sewer, that's a problem. That's more of a public health thing. So we kept that portion of the sentence. Those will be captured in the documents forthcoming. They are not highlighted. I was going to pull it up on screen, highlight them yellow and point them out tonight, and then verbally tell you what the new language would be. But I quickly learned blue, pink, red, green, and yellow are already used on almost every page of that document. You'll never find it. So I just wanted to point it out tonight that we are not going in the direction for those two types.
All right, thanks. Are there any other comments? Okay, well, we're looking forward to continuing this discussion with you, of course, and My closing comment is that, I know that, we will have the model ordinance that the state passed instituted on us on July 1st if we don't pass this by June 30th. It's grown to sort of a Godzilla in my mind where it's going to come through the town and destroy it and ravage it. Just wondering basically what will the real effect of the model ordinance be? And I don't need details. I just wanted to find out basically big, broad brushstrokes of why we don't want to adopt the model ordinance.
Well, there are many items or issues or concepts in that model ordinance that just don't apply to us as a tier 3 city. But there are also some that could be argued absolutely do. And we're trying to avoid that entire issue by adopting local regulations specific to critical areas and trees. To some extent, there are negative impacts by going with the model ordinance, setbacks, heights, things that we don't intend to change, but we have not done a complete analysis of what those are because we've never considered that's the path we want to take. But the clean option is just to not take that path.
All right. Thank you. Okay, so we'll continue the discussion on June 9th.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Okay, we have one other item under council discussion and action. That's the continued discussion regarding the budget challenges. And I think the document that we all got in our mailboxes, this was one of our commenters from last week suggested two choices to eliminate the debt. And if you have it, I don't know if I can show it on screen. I don't know if that's helpful. Okay. Yes.
Do we feel, how long are we gonna be attempting to have this conversation and do we need a break beforehand? What is your thought?
I was budgeting 15 minutes for it, but if we want to go longer, we should probably take a break. What do y'all, what's the council head nod here? Do we need a break?
I would like a very short break, if
Okay.
that's possible.
All right, why don't we adjourn then for 5 minutes? Is that enough? Okay, so we'll meet back at 8:58. All right. Okay, thanks for a short break. We're back and we're going to be discussing continued discussion regarding budget challenges, item 11B. And so just wanted to kick off with the council received the sheet that one of our commenters last week had. It says two choices to eliminate debt, breaking them up a bit to a column A and a column B. And there's no particularly identification of which line item each item goes to. But first of all, I just wanted to comment that I appreciate the fact that someone had enough care for the city that they went through the budget line by line and found these items. It's shows basically that our citizens, our residents really do care about basically, not just how we spend their money, but also the fact that the city provides these kinds of services. And the fact that some of them basically are really things that aren't so much necessary as they are basically sort of pass-through items. Like, for instance, I'm looking at on column A, there's a $775,000 figure given as part of the total. And I know that $500,000 of that is the Department of Commerce grant that was for the climate element. And the fact is that that's money that was a grant. And so if it wasn't included in our budget, it still wouldn't go any distance to reducing the amount of, for instance, the expenditures that we had. We wouldn't have spent that money on the climate element. And the fact is that we would have had to do the climate element at some point anyway, because the Department of Commerce is going to require it for the comprehensive plan by, I believe, the end of 2027. So the point is that basically by getting the grant, we were able to actually save the city some money, not having to expend our own general fund in order to basically get that climate element written. And I'm looking really forward to basically seeing that presentation in about a month or so. All right, so with that as kind of a preface, I didn't know if any of you had other points you wanted to make. We're going to try to stick to as much new material as possible just to keep the discussion going along. So does anybody else have any comments they want to make? Yes, also to mention that the council received a copy of the budget from the finance department. We really appreciate that. Thank you. All right, so I think as you look over the thing, I have a sort of a direction that I think we should be heading on this. Clearly, basically, my one-page handout that I gave out last time was trying to prep the council for discussion about a potential property tax levy lift. And I guess the questions that are going to face us in the future are, A, do we do this lid lift? And B, if so, when? C, for how much? And D, what are the specific line items in the budget are we going to try to cover with it? So if anybody has other questions they'd like to add on to that, I'd certainly entertain them. Councilmember Riddle.
So one of the questions that I sort of mentioned briefly in our last meeting, where you brought up your suggested levy lidless structure was trying to look at what is our operating fund without the one-time funds that traditionally you want your one-time funds to go to one-time expenditures. You know, you don't want them to go to ongoing operations because they're a one-time, they may not be there the next biennium. So I think that will help me structure a little bit, like, what is that gap? What is the ongoing funding gap for what we are? Because we have been padding it with the one-time funds. And if you look at prior budgets, we seem to be doing, you know, not as bad as maybe we are. And if you think about it, if there's a way for us to get our ongoing revenue to match our ongoing expenditures, or at least to be a lot closer, then those one-time funds are these, they're a boon to the city. Then they can go right back into the city in whatever form the city needs, whether that's, you know, additional capital or transportation or whatever. So, but we never know if that one-time fund is going to come, how big it'll be. A lot of the ones that were floating us for the last several years have been federal, and there's an unlikely that we will be continuing to see that amount of federal funding coming our way. So that was just sort of a thought that I had, is to help the community see, like, if your paycheck doesn't cover your expenses and you have to pull out of savings to make everything work, but you get that check from grandma at your birthday, and okay, now I can put that check in and I'm gonna be fine. But you know, we just have to know what are we actually working with, I guess,
Right.
is kind of my question.
Grandma's only going to give us so many checks.
She's only give you a check that one.
That's right.
Twice a year, you know, just Christmas and your birthday.
So I'll direct at the Director Vaughn here. Is that a possible thing to do? Be able to separate out the one-time funds effect from the general fund?
I think we definitely could evaluate that for the current expenses. I think that evaluating that on the fund balance expense side might be more challenging. But I definitely think for the operating expenses, we could break that out and very easily show the revenues, the operating, what we would define as operating, which are ongoing revenues, money coming in versus the outgoing expenditures of the money going out.
Great, thank you. Councilmember Lebo.
In some ways, don't we already do that? So when you look at the adopted budget and you go back to the, pages 156 to 165, you establish a baseline that tries to reduce the one-time expenditures so that you can look at the comparison. So I just suggest that maybe we already have the information.
We do have on a high level.
I'm thinking like pages 156 through 165.
On an extremely high level, we can go to page 46 where you have the 2 years of the revenue versus the expenditures and the delta there, whether you're supporting it by the fund balance or whether you're adding to it.
Right, but later on in the package, you'll see that you've stripped out some one-time elements to create a new baseline.
There's more, yes. What page specifically were you looking at?
156 to 165, if my memory serves me.
Oh, yes. That's another way to approach it.
So some of the information may be there,
Okay.
but we don't have to.
Yeah, that may be a good starting point for me to kind of understand and bring the numbers to council.
Okay. Oh, Councilmember Goldman?
Yes, thanks. So kind of jumping off that list of questions that you had about, should we do a levy lid lift and details? As we're continuing down that path, I think it would be beneficial. We want to get lots of feedback from the public, but as we start to sort of come up with some possible answers to those questions, providing that to the community to say, would you be willing to do a levy of X if it would fund what services Y? And how about, and should have started earlier in the alphabet, but would you take, how about levy level Z to cover services A instead? And so as we're having those conversations, if we can help to kind of guide the community for what feedback would be the most beneficial for us as to, do we want to do this and to what level and what services?
Yeah, I mean, in fact, we could sort of add on to the survey scenarios. If you recall that we had the community survey that was quite well subscribed to, and it had, I think, 3 different funding levels. I think it was 30 cents, 60 cents, and I believe 90 cents per thousand, and had basically broad implications for the overall health of the city's finances. But you're right, making it more specific might be a really good idea.
Yeah, I'm thinking in terms of your one pager that say, would you a levy of this many dollars or this many cents per thousand, it would get us this many new police officers, or it would cover jail costs. And so providing some more specific than just public safety. I think that would be helpful.
Right, understood. Councilmember Good.
I think that Councilmember Goldman is right on, because that was the main comments that people had on the survey, was just that, what is this money for? What is it going to be used for? So, and I thought we were going to be doing some more public outreach in an email or something.
Right. I mean, that's a great idea. And one of the things that we're working with our consultant is, of course, basically messaging. We look forward to actually having a bit more messaging in the coming months. Right now, we've been we're still discussing whether we're doing this at all, but certainly once we make any kind of decision, we should communicate that as clearly as possible. Right. Anything else? So I think then our next opportunity to look at this is going to be, I believe, business and finance. Unless Chair Lebo, you had your time scheduled for that meeting.
Yeah. I think there would be a time for discussion in the budget finance.
I appreciate that. Thank you. So since some of you are still taking a look at your budget, I'll hold the floor open for a couple more minutes. If you think of anything you want to discuss, please let me know.
I think the other thing that was a question, and the mayor suggested it may not be viable, is sort of like an adjustable rate levy.
Mhm.
So I guess clarifying that that's not allowed by the state would be useful, that that's not an option for us to take. It's just.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, and I think we'll make that very clear in our communications. Director Bond.
Councilmember Riddle, can you clarify that just a little bit?
So easing folks into it, so starting with a lower levy rate year 1, a slightly higher year 2, and then year 3, 4, 5, 6 could be the same levy rate.
It's not, she said it last time, it wasn't allowed.
I believe, and I'm gonna state it as I believe, because I will double check this. But I believe you have to state the increase, and then in the resolution, you have to state if you do have the intent of increasing it per the CPI, which is elected by a lot of entities in order to increase levies, to follow a format. But the city does have the option, if they do not believe they will use that, to not increase it to that dollar amount. So if they believe, if the CPI, for example, went up 7%, I know that's really high, but the city thought that they only needed 4.5% in addition to, I'm just going to use the exact example that was presented at 32 cents, then the city would have that option. But to start, we do have to, whatever we state as far as the 32 cents, that is what the city then would take
And is,
as an increase.
and is this similar to our current 1% where it's up to, or when we do the levy, that is a kind of, that is a guaranteed capture of funds?
It continues to be variable like that 1%. So just stating the 1% that, for example, from 2024 to 25, 25's went down. And so when you look at that, it would be in addition to the current levy rate that can vary. So that fluctuates and continues to be a complex, very complex discussion.
Very complex. Okay, but thank you for helping me wrap
So
my
the-
head around that.
So that would be, yeah, there's a piece that isn't variable, but there may be a piece depending on how that's written that I guess I would say could be variable.
Councilmember Goldman.
So on point, to clarify one of the things we were discussing on Monday, if the overall goal was to hit 32 cents, would it be possible to say year one, we're going to do 10 cents, year two, we're going to do 20 cents, and then years 3 through 6 will be 32 cents? Like that sort, so it's not varying with inflation, it's not varying, it's basically saying, we're going to step up
Mhm.
until we reach the overall, like the final level.
In my experience of doing previous levies, I have not, that's not been the format. And I have not seen that. And just quickly looking at our attorney, I'm not sure that we've seen that in the past. That doesn't mean we can't check into that and look and see if that is something that could be done.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. I think there's a slight opportunity because that 1% that we are capped by the law, we don't technically have to take all of that. We need to because of inflation and costs. So we have taken it every year because costs are always exceeding that. So we can talk as a council if there's a policy around balancing the levy with the 1%, but I think that gets kind of messy and it's hard for the community to understand. But there are some minor mechanisms
Well-
there. I just don't know if it's a good idea.
Heck, it's hard for me to understand.
I know.
Yeah, okay, well, thanks. All right, no, I look forward to hearing the results of your research, so thanks. All right, anybody else? Okay, so I've posed my questions, so please think about those. We'll talk again at the Business and Finance meeting on the 29th on this topic. And just to give you an outside idea, if we were to basically try to go for the November ballot, then we'd have to make a decision in August. That's, I believe, August 9th is when we have to submit to the county. And so work backwards from that as to basically potential timescales.
And just to bring up as we move forward with developing our response to the budget, not really a shortfall, issues. It would be useful, I think, to start thinking about, are there workshop days that we want to start planning for having folks come in and, see what we're doing, understand the numbers, ask questions of hopefully experts that understand this tax process. I think that would be useful. We know we got a lot of great response for the lakefront park, which was really cool and fun. And this is maybe a little less cool and fun, but I think is equally important for the community to be involved in this process.
I agree, and I think it would be good to have some of our consultants come and show their faces and basically say, okay, this is, why we hired these folks, because they can explain the stuff that you and I might not necessarily be able to do well. So, yeah. Okay, I guess then we'll move on, unless anybody has further comment. Okay, so other business.
I guess other business. several of us had an opportunity to join the farmer's market on opening day. And so there was actually a few comments from folks that came through the Meet Your Council Member station. We had a kid come by and was concerned about her route to her bus stop, and that there was a blind corner with no shoulder that she had to walk, and her dad always walked her because they deemed it too dangerous for her to walk on her own to the bus stop. Really reinforcing the comments from the Shoreline school board meeting, where think about routes to school and routes to bus stops, because those are equally important. And then another comment around addressing invasives in our parks and trying to, and I know we do our best to do that, especially in the Lion Creek itself. So the parks and the creek, how do we deal with invasives? We had a really large project on McAleer Creek to try to work on that. But there was just a comment that, you know, we could see it really readily on Lion Creek that it needs some love. And then another question about dealing with ivy, and I know that there's a ivy out event, but I can't remember who's putting it on.
Yes. Is it
Is it stewardship?
I believe so, stewardship.
is it the specific parks or is it citywide?
You know, I think that they take them by, you know, the most comments, because they seem to go to different places based on what comments are, and they'll get a team together and they'll start removing the ivy.
Yeah.
We need one for knotweed.
Fair enough. Okay.
And then I think the comment kind of following that is, how do we help and support homeowners to do this as well as, you know, especially folks that can't get out there and start hacking up ivy on their own. So those are some really great comments from folks that came by and chatted with us.
It's wonderful. I'm glad that they're in the record now so that we can come back and look at them. And actually on point, I'd like to also bring up another business, which is, do any of you want to be the Parks Board liaison, since we don't have one now?
I would think about it.
I'm trying to remember which night it is. Is that the Tuesday night one?
So the next Parks Board meeting is next Wednesday, the 28th. I don't think that's their standard meeting date, but it's their next meeting date.
Yeah, Wednesdays are tough for me.
All right, please
We
think.
have to get back to you.
Yeah, please think about it. And yeah, and let's check on when they actually, when their actual meeting date is. I think it's at the beginning of the month.
Is that something our city clerk could tell us?
Fourth Tuesday of the month.
Okay, so it's usually Tuesdays.
It's usually Tuesdays.
All right, so please think about that, and we'll take this up next time. I think if it's the 28th, I think I may be able to attend, so I'll just go as a one-time thing. If the Parks Board has any questions of council, I'll try to answer them as I can. Okay.
I have one thing.
Go ahead.
I know that the previous, we had Jeff Snedden here, and then we also had the fire marshal from Shoreline talking about all of the projects that are trying to load up within our area. I've recently noticed that the 130th going east and west is blocked now. And so getting east or west between, literally, you can only do it between North Gateway, sometimes 145th. And there is a conversion of all of these projects that is happening. Even if you leave the Sound Transit project out of it, they're still all happening, and they're in positions that will cause cut through traffic next to our schools. So I sent a list to Chief Harden, and he's gonna send it to the traffic calming people. But I provided a list of them, a graph that shows the project's overlapping dates, and a map to show where they're impacting, and we're being encircled by projects. So I think it's something that we may want to address. I mean, at least to inform our residents that these things are happening, because we're going to have a lot of traffic coming through our cities.
Right. And not to mention the fact that our WashDOT project is going to start with the culvert sometime this summer, plus the fact that the culvert under where the old Jack in the Box used to be in Kenmore is going to start at some point too. Yeah, there are a lot of
I'll send you the list.
yes, there will be a lot of things that people should be aware of. So thank you, Councilmember Good, for bringing our notice to that. All right, any other business? Okay, let's go to council committee reports then. So start with council member reports.
As Director Hoffman mentioned, the planning commission met this month, and I would be a poor reporter to suggest that I could actually report better than he did. So I won't.
That's fair. Thank you for your discretion. All right, anyone else? We'll move over to well, any kind of reports of any committees you've been on. All right, seeing none, I don't have one for myself either. So Mayor didn't give me a specific anything to report there. City Administrator's report, Director Vaughn, did City Administrator Hill give you anything to talk about?
Nope, just
Okay.
what's in there. Thank you.
All right, thanks. Yeah, I thought was a great job showing basically the promotions of the officers, and that was a really wonderful thing to include in that. Really appreciate basically how incisive the police log has become. It's a very, very good resource, and I recommend anybody out there looking at the wanting to know what's going on in our city crime-wise to take a look at that, because our officers are doing some amazing work. So yeah, and I think Chief Arden, you have something?
Just a reminder, it's been posted on social media. This Saturday, we have Hope Stream coming out that is going to do the forum for our community. And I think we have plus 50 people have registered, so pretty good.
Yeah, and thank you for that. That's a wonderful event. So yeah, I do encourage people to come out to that. Okay, is there any other good of the order kind of information people want to share? Okay, seeing none, I will entertain a move to adjourn.
So moved?
All right, we are adjourned.
I
Thank you, council.
know, of doing